Hello everybody and welcome to another top 5 board gaming video. Today's topic is one that I both love and loathe, and that is legacy games. For anybody unfamiliar, legacy games are games where you play over the course of several rounds, and the idea is that as you play through, you are changing the landscape of the board game. You can change what cities or whatever are accessible, you can change what items you have permanently, how much experience you have, all of this kind of stuff, and throughout the entire time some kind of a narrative is typically unfolding so that you can learn about some stuff. It's very much narrative driven, it's very much almost like a storybook for lack of a better term, but that almost insults what a legacy game is meant to be. There are some wonderful legacy games out there. There are some not so wonderful legacy games out there. I have a love-hate relationship with them, but the fact is I wanted to do something unique today and talk about games that I personally think would work really, really well as legacy board games, because I think they have the right styling, I think that they have the right mechanics, I think they have the right characters, and the potential for a narrative that could really fit well into a legacy. That said, whether or not they're ever going to be made is probably 0 to 0 to maybe possibly theoretically, but it doesn't matter. I can imagine it, and I'm going to explain what I personally mean for it. That said, let me know anything and everything you think in the comments below. If you have particular games in mind for this type of thing, I would love to hear anything and everything you guys have to say, as always. But that said, we're going to dive right in with my number 5. At number 5, we have the sacrilegious, sanctimonious Mage Knight. That's right, one of my favorite games at the very bottom of the list. But the fact is that this game is a scenario-driven adventure game where the whole point is that you are taking a character, building them up, performing deck building, advancing their capabilities, and doing all of this kind of stuff through varied scenarios. The problem with it is that the scenarios are not inherently connected. And so to me, I feel like you could so easily write a narrative based off of the Mage Knight world that would fit perfectly as a legacy game. The thing is that as it stands now, it's really not bad, because simply playing through a scenario is great. You can adjust the difficulty so that you can have it harder or easier on yourself. You can play with different styles every time and all of that kind of thing. Playing this as a legacy game might take the magic out of it, but at the same time, I would really like to see what designers and creators could come up with as far as a narrative that fits into the lore of Mage Knight. And that's why it is my number 5. At number 4, I've got Galaxy Trucker, famously one of the most chaotic games that is in existence, where the idea is that you are trying to build up a ship that is able to take things from point A to point B by essentially grabbing parts and trying to get the good stuff and building up your ship and all this kind of thing. And that mechanic fits very well into a legacy. Imagine you build up your ship and now you have permanent upgrades to a ship for the next round. And the next round is a little bit harder. Maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe instead of having to ship goods, you have to go and attack, or something along those lines, or you have to defend a bunch of merchants or something along those lines. Is your ship going to be able to handle it? Do you need to make some adjustments? All of that kind of thing. Can you have a parts warehouse where you're freely able to swap things depending on the needs of the mission? All of that kind of stuff. Not to mention, depending on how well you do on particular missions, maybe if you fail a supply mission, that colony is now no longer going to survive, so you're not able to access it or any of the quests that it offers. There is a lot that can go on with this, and it really reminds me of a lot of PC RPGs like Outer Worlds and Fallout and all of those kinds of things, where you can have drastic effects on the entire world, potentially. I can see the potential. I really can see it somewhere buried in there. I know it exists, and so I would be really excited to see it, but I know it would be a tough thing to adapt, and so that's why Galaxy Trucker is my number 4. At number 3, I've got Stockpile. You could also think of this as speculation as well, or any of these other types of games where the idea is that you're dealing with money and a volatile market for buying and selling stocks. And the thing is, as we have seen relatively recently with GameStop and AMC and all of these sort of things, stuff goes up and down in absolutely insane ways. And I think a legacy stockpile really could work. Because imagine, during your first round, you kind of set the tone. Are you going to be in a bear market or a bull market for your next round? How are you sitting in terms of your investments? Are you in a good spot? Are you in a bad spot? Do you need to change and pivot? We could have things like being able to invest in manufacturing and science versus investing in artistic endeavors, or, you know, just whatever it happens to be. Cryptocurrency, that's the big thing, obviously. And so I would be really curious to see how it goes. And stockpile over speculation, in my particular opinion, is because of all of the different expansions that it has. You've got a lot of expansions related to different people that can be added, interacted with, all of that sort of thing. And so I would be really curious to see how it is that the market can fluctuate even further depending on how the market ends up. If you end up with a relatively non-viable market or a non-volatile market, then in the next round, you start off with a relatively non-volatile market that doesn't swing so much. But if you end the first round with really big swings, then maybe those swings can get even bigger, which means more potential money, but more potential losses. I would love to see something like that monetarily in this, because the fact is that stocks, trading, and all of that kind of stuff is an ongoing thing, and it could fit very well as a legacy game. Stockpile and or speculation to an extent, collectively my number 3. At number 2, I've got evolution. As you guys know, I'm a huge science nerd, and the fact is that the whole point of evolution is that you are making the best animals capable of surviving, and that's pretty much it. The idea is that at the end of the game, you count up the points as far as the amount of food that you have made. But what if we can take it a step further? What if you save those animals for the next round, and now other things have evolved and you have to fight off AI opponents? What if you go into something like dominant species, where now you have an actual map, and whatever you made in round 1 of evolution now has to try to survive in a more desolate environment that is more specific and strategic and all of this kind of thing? I think it would be absolutely amazing. I think it would work really well, not to mention the fact that scientifically speaking, it would be much more accurate, because the whole point is that you've got species evolving, and the whole point is to see how long are you able to last? How long are you able to stick around? And narratively, we've already got things like climate and all of these other things. We could add in stuff that's the equivalent of, I mean, we've already got evolution flight and a few other different things. So there's a lot of stuff to work with, where you might have an advantage in natural selection, you might have a disadvantage, and there can be all sorts of different triggers depending on what you're doing when you're going from rounds 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And all of that kind of thing. I can see all sorts of different cool stuff with it, but the fact is, evolution on its own is a great game, and so I wouldn't take that away from it, but I would love to see some kind of a legacy version of this. Evolution, my number 2. At number 1, I've got Downforce, or potentially Formula D, depending on which one you like more. The fact is that both of these games are about heavy moto F1 racing, and the thing is, they don't stop with one race. Imagine a franchise-style racing legacy game, a full GT series, where it doesn't matter necessarily how well you do on the first race. You still get your payout, you're able to upgrade your parts, upgrade your car, make yourself bigger, better, stronger, and faster, and you can go and do better and better things on different tracks, and depending on where everybody wants to go can determine what the track is. Maybe you roll to see what kind of weather you have to determine what track you're going to go to. I think that this would work perfectly as a legacy because we see this all the time in video games where you have the kind of career mode in a racing game, and the idea is that you're going through all of these different GT events and trying to get the most points overall. So losing one race doesn't mean that you have lost the entire cup. I would really like to see that, especially in the context of having some role-playing and upgrading elements where you can make your car a little bit better, you can brake a little bit better without damaging your car as much, stuff like that. I think it would work amazingly well with either Downforce and or Formula D. I just feel like this would make a really great legacy game. Downforce, my number one. Well, everybody, that's it for me. Again, this is kind of a weird thing because I have a love-hate relationship with legacy games in that typically you can only play through them one time because you know the story that's going on. But with a lot of the ones that I mentioned today, it's not necessarily about the story. It's about how you and your character are progressing through a world. And there doesn't have to be a story behind it. Formula D and Downforce, it's a race. And so you have season by season by season. It doesn't necessarily have to change. There doesn't have to be a story to it. You could have rivalries or something along those lines. All sorts of different options, but it's not like something along the lines of Time Stories or Gloomhaven or Pandemic Legacy, where you have a very distinct narrative that you're following. And I think that's really cool. I think that would be a great way to engage more legacy games and get more players, in that you don't necessarily have an overarching story, but rather you're trying to figure out how best you can adapt to the new things that are coming along. But that said, as always, I want to know what you guys have to say. This is a really unique thing. It's a very fascinating topic of what do you think can make a good legacy game and why? Let me know anything and everything in the comments below, because you know I love to hear it all. And as always, if you haven't done so already, please take a look at my various social media pages, because over there you can interact with myself and my channel in a whole bunch of really fun ways. That said, as I've been doing lately, I will say again, we are winning the war against COVID very, very gradually. It is slow going. We've got variants out there. Please go and get your vaccines if you haven't already done so. But regardless, stay safe, stay inside as much as possible, and hope that everybody's families are safe and that you all are being safe going to work and all of that kind of stuff. But regardless, thank you so much for watching the video. Hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.